The encounter. Veteran officer Ryan Brooks was known for his firm demeanor and sharp words. Once celebrated as a hero in his community, time had hardened him into someone bitter and inflexible. While patrolling a wealthy area of the city, he noticed a luxury vehicle, a model far beyond his salary's reach. To his surprise, the car was driven by a young black man, dressed in a tailored suit and appearing calm. Ryan decided to pull the man over, but a routine document check quickly devolved into a degrading encounter filled with racial insults. The young man, maintaining his composure, followed every order, eventually driving away with Ryan feeling smug, believing he had taught the man a lesson. However, what Ryan didn't anticipate was an unexpected encounter with the same young man the next day, under vastly different circumstances. The sun was blazing as Ryan Brooks drove down Main Avenue, the patrol car's engine merging with the distant wail of sirens. A seasoned officer, Ryan had seen it all in his 30 years on the streets. Those decades had toughened him, making him a figure both feared and respected. Ryan prided himself on his strict methods, convinced that his approach was what kept order in an increasingly chaotic world. The dispatcher's raspy voice crackled over the radio, interrupting the silence in the cruiser. Suspected stolen vehicle, silver Tesla Model S, last seen in the affluent district. All units be on alert. Ryan grabbed the mic, grunting his acknowledgement before speeding up. Finally, something to break the monotony, he muttered, weary of mundane stops and minor violations. A high-end car in an upscale neighborhood driven by someone who, in Ryan's view, certainly didn't belong there, sounded like the perfect opportunity to assert his authority once more. As he rounded a corner, Ryan spotted the car in question, a sleek silver Tesla, glistening under the sun. The vehicle was idling at a red light, waiting patiently. The driver, a young black man, was impeccably dressed in a suit and sunglasses. Ryan scowled. Something about the scene irritated him instantly. He switched on the patrol lights and approached slowly, his eyes locked on the driver. The young man, seemingly unsurprised by the cruiser, calmly pulled over to the curb at Ryan's signal, rolling down the window with a serene expression. Ryan exited the cruiser with purposeful strides, his hand resting on his holster, not because he intended to use it, but because he knew it heightened tension. License and registration now, Ryan ordered curtly, skipping any pleasantries. His tone was cold, bordering on disdainful. The young man, showing no sign of annoyance, retrieved the documents from the glove compartment and handed them over, his gaze steady on Ryan's face. "Good morning, officer," he said, his voice calm but firm. Ryan didn't respond, only snatched the documents and scrutinized them with suspicion, eager to find something amiss, anything to justify what he already believed was a dubious situation. "David Green," Ryan muttered as he read the name on the driver's license. "What are you doing around here? Is this car yours?" "Yes, sir," David replied, maintaining his polite tone. "I'm on my way to an important meeting." "A meeting, huh?" Ryan looked up at David over the papers, a sarcastic smile creeping across his lips. "And what kind of meeting would that be in a neighborhood like this, driving a car like this?" The contempt in Ryan's voice was unmistakable, but David didn't flinch. "A business meeting, sir," David responded, his gaze unwavering. "If you'd like, you can call the number on the card attached to my license for confirmation." Ryan raised an eyebrow, glancing at the business card attached to the documents, but made no move to pick up the phone. Instead, he leaned in closer to the window. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he asked, his tone now menacing. "You think I don't know when something's off? A kid like you driving a car like this in a place like this? You must be up to something." "I don't think anything of the sort, sir," David replied, still calm. "I believe you're just doing your job, but I assure you there's nothing wrong here." Ryan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, you're a smart one, aren't you? One of those young punks who thinks he can buy respect with money." He stepped back, shaking his head in disdain. "But not with me. I know your type, always thinking you're above everyone else. But deep down, you're all the same. Troublemakers." David remained composed, his eyes never leaving Ryan's. "With all due respect, sir," he said, "I think you're mistaken. I'm just trying to get to my meeting. There's no need to prolong this stop." "Need?" Ryan repeated the word, venom dripping from his mouth. "I make the rules here, kid, and you should be grateful I'm not hauling you in right now." "Arrested? For what?" David asked, still calm but now with a hint of disbelief in his voice. For disrespect, Ryan replied with a malicious smile. I've given enough orders to justify it. There was a brief silence, filled only with the distant hum of traffic. Finally, David took a deep breath and spoke, his voice still calm but now firmer, commanding Ryan's attention. Officer, I understand you have your way of working, but I assure you I'm not breaking any laws. I'm here for an important appointment, and I'm fully willing to cooperate. But I'd like to get on with my day. Ryan felt a surge of irritation run through him. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in such a composed and direct manner. He stared at David, searching for any sign of fear or weakness, but found only unshakable calm. Finally, without another word, Ryan brusquely handed back the documents. Get out of here before I change my mind, he growled, his voice cold with frustration. David put his sunglasses back on, nodded respectfully, and started the car. Have a good day, officer, he said before driving away in the Tesla, leaving Ryan standing on the curb with a bitter taste of dissatisfaction growing in his mouth. Ryan watched the car disappear, a storm of emotions churning inside him. Something about the encounter didn't sit right with him, but he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. David's calm demeanor, his steady posture, and his lack of fear or subservience. Everything about it bothered Ryan more than he was willing to admit. The revelation. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the precinct as usual, his footsteps echoing through the familiar halls. There was an unusual buzz in the air, as if everyone was anticipating something. Ryan noticed his colleagues seemed more agitated than usual, talking excitedly about the arrival of the new police chief, recently transferred from another city. Another bureaucrat who'll talk about changes and then disappear, Ryan muttered to himself, paying little attention. He'd seen plenty of chiefs come and go, all with empty promises of improvement. To Ryan, it made no difference. He would keep doing his job his way, as he always had. As he entered the briefing room, Ryan stopped abruptly. There, standing before the team, was the new chief, David Green, the same young man he had stopped and humiliated the day before. The shock hit Ryan like a bolt of lightning, his eyes widening as they locked onto David, who stood perfectly composed, dressed in an elegant suit with no trace of resentment on his face. David cast a brief glance at Ryan before addressing the team. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice calm yet authoritative. It's a pleasure to be here and to work with such an experienced team. I know each of you has a long career and much to teach, and I'm eager to learn from all of you. David's words echoed in Ryan's head, but he couldn't focus on what was being said. His mind was stuck on the fact that the young man he had humiliated the previous day was now his superior. How was this possible? And more importantly, what did this mean for him? The meeting continued, but Ryan heard nothing else. His world seemed to be spinning as he tried to process the situation. When the meeting finally ended, Ryan was eager to leave, but was stopped by an unexpected request. Officer Brooks, David called out, making Ryan stop in his tracks. I'd like a word with you in my office, please. Ryan swallowed hard, feeling the sweat bead on his forehead. Of course, sir, he replied, his voice sounding more submissive than he would have liked. He followed David down the hallway, each step increasing his anxiety. In the office, David gestured to a chair in front of his desk. Ryan sat down, his eyes avoiding direct contact with David, who was calmly reviewing some papers. The silence was suffocating. There's something you should know, Ryan, David began, handing a dossier to Ryan, whose hands trembled slightly as he took it. He opened it, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. His eyes skimmed the first few pages quickly, but upon recognizing the details of the case described, he stopped, feeling the ground fall away beneath him. It was an old case, a very old one. 15 years ago, Ryan had arrested a black man during a drug bust. At the time, the arrest had been hailed as a success. Ryan had been praised by his superiors and the community. He remembered the details well. The man, Samuel Green, had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in the sweep that had taken down a major drug ring. Although Samuel had no criminal record and the evidence against him was circumstantial at best, Ryan had been convinced that Samuel was guilty. I take it you recognize the name, David said, breaking the silence. Ryan's throat tightened, and he nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He remembered the trial. Samuel had maintained his innocence, but with the pressure from the community and the media, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years. Ryan had testified against him, certain of his guilt at the time. He remembered the look on Samuel's face, defeated, broken, and utterly betrayed by the system. But that wasn't the worst part. That man you arrested was my father, David continued, his voice calm but firm. He was innocent, but you didn't see it. You ruined his life, Ryan, and mine too. We lost everything, our home, our reputation, our future. I was only a child back then, but I remember every detail. And now, here we are. Ryan felt his heart pound in his chest, his breathing becoming shallow. The dossier was full of evidence pointing to Samuel's innocence, evidence that had been overlooked, dismissed, or intentionally buried by those eager to see a conviction. Ryan had always prided himself on being just and fair, but now he was faced with the harsh reality that he had been part of a system that destroyed innocent lives, including that of his superior's father. David's eyes remained on Ryan as he spoke, his tone even and measured. I've seen your record, Ryan. I've read every complaint against you, every case where you crossed the line. Yet somehow, you've managed to avoid serious consequences. Until now. Ryan's face paled. He had no defense. What could he say? He had always believed he was doing the right thing, but now he could see how blind he had been. David, I'm sorry, Ryan stammered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. David sighed, leaning back in his chair. I don't need your apologies, Ryan. I don't need you to feel sorry for what you did. What I need is for you to understand the impact of your actions, to acknowledge the pain you've caused, and to know that things are going to change, whether you like it or not. Ryan looked down at his hands, unable to meet David's gaze. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a single arrest or an unjustified stop. It was about a lifetime of choices, a career built on the suffering of others. The reckoning. Ryan sat in the small, sterile office, his mind reeling from the revelation. The walls seemed to close in around him as he grappled with the crushing weight of his past actions. For years, he had prided himself on being a tough, no-nonsense officer, believing that his rigid approach was necessary to maintain order. But now, faced with the consequences of his decisions, Ryan couldn't escape the stark reality of the harm he had caused. David Green, the new chief of police, watched Ryan closely. He had waited years for this moment, not for revenge, but for justice. He had worked tirelessly to rise through the ranks, driven by a desire to change the system that had wronged his father and countless others like him. Now, as he stood before the man who had played a pivotal role in his family's downfall, David felt a complex mix of emotions. He knew that what came next would define not only his leadership, but also his ability to heal the wounds of the past. Ryan, David began, his voice steady. I'm not here to punish you. That's not what this is about. I'm here to ensure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. My father spent 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He lost everything, his freedom, his dignity, his life. And you were part of that. Ryan's throat tightened as he tried to speak, but the words caught in his mouth. He had always believed in the righteousness of his actions, but now he was forced to confront the fact that he had been wrong. Deeply, irrevocably wrong. David continued, I've reviewed your record thoroughly. You've had a long career, Ryan, and you've made a lot of arrests. Some of those were justified, but others were driven by your own biases, your own prejudices. The system protected you, allowed you to continue without facing real consequences. But that ends today. Ryan's heart raced as he listened, a sense of dread settling over him. He had seen officers face disciplinary actions before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about losing the very foundation of who he thought he was. David stood up from behind his desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. Change is coming, Ryan, he said, his tone resolute, and it's going to start with you. We're going to re-examine every case you've been involved in, every arrest, every complaint. If we find evidence of misconduct, there will be consequences, not just for you, but for the department as a whole. Ryan felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He had always been confident that he was untouchable, that the system would protect him no matter what. But now, faced with the prospect of a thorough investigation, he realized just how vulnerable he really was. I understand, Ryan finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. I know I made mistakes. David turned to face him, his expression unreadable. This isn't just about cooperating, Ryan. This is about accountability. You've spent years enforcing the law, but now it's time for you to be held accountable to it. The department is going to change, and I need you to decide if you're willing to be part of that change. Ryan nodded slowly, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him like a leaden blanket. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation. I want to make things right. David studied Ryan for a moment, his gaze piercing. Making things right isn't going to be easy, he said. It's going to require more than just words. It's going to require real action, starting with an apology. Ryan's eyes widened in surprise. An apology? Yes, David replied firmly, not just to me, but to the people you've wronged. The community you were supposed to protect and serve. You'll need to face them, Ryan, and acknowledge the harm you've caused. That's the first step toward making amends. Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. The idea of standing before the community, admitting his mistakes, and asking for forgiveness was terrifying. But he knew that David was right. If he was truly committed to change, he had to be willing to confront his past head-on. I can do that, Ryan said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever it takes. David nodded, a flicker of something, perhaps empathy, crossing his face. Good, because this isn't just about you, Ryan. This is about the department, the city, and the future we're trying to build. We're going to need everyone on board if we're going to make real progress. Ryan felt a pang of shame as he realized how far he had fallen from the ideals he once held. He had become the very thing he had sworn to fight against, an agent of injustice. But now, with David's guidance, he saw a glimmer of hope that he could start to make amends, however difficult the road ahead might be. As Ryan left David's office, his mind was filled with a tumultuous mix of regret, fear, and a newfound determination. He knew that his journey toward redemption would be long and painful, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a drive to do better, to be better. The apology. The following week, a community meeting was scheduled in the local church, a place that had long served as a safe haven for the neighborhood's residents. Word had spread quickly about the new police chief and his plans to address past wrongs within the department. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as people gathered in the pews, their faces a mixture of skepticism, hope, and anger. Ryan stood in the back of the room, his stomach churning with anxiety. He had never been one to back down from a confrontation, but this was different. This was about facing the people he had wronged, acknowledging his mistakes, and asking for their forgiveness. The thought of it made his hands tremble, but he knew it was something he had to do. David entered the room, greeted by respectful nods and murmurs of approval. He walked to the front of the church, taking his place at the podium. The room fell silent as he began to speak. Good evening, everyone, David began, his voice steady and clear. Thank you for coming tonight. I know many of you have concerns about the police department, about the way you've been treated in the past. I'm here to tell you that those concerns are valid, and we're committed to addressing them. He paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with several people. This department has made mistakes, he continued. Mistakes that have caused pain, suffering, and loss. We can't change the past, but we can take responsibility for it. And that's why we're here tonight. David gestured to Ryan, who felt a jolt of fear shoot through him as all eyes turned toward him. Officer Ryan Brooks has something he wants to say, David announced, stepping aside to give Ryan the floor. Ryan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest as he made his way to the podium. He could feel the weight of the community's gaze on him, a palpable sense of anger and betrayal in the air. Taking a deep breath, Ryan gripped the edges of the podium and forced himself to speak. My name is Ryan Brooks, he began, his voice shaky but growing stronger as he continued. I've been a police officer in this city for 30 years. In that time, I've seen a lot, done a lot, and made a lot of mistakes. He paused, searching for the right words. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I'm sorry for the times I let my own biases cloud my judgment, for the times I treated people unfairly because of the color of their skin, for the pain and suffering I've caused. Ryan looked out at the crowd, his eyes meeting those of the people he had once dismissed, ignored, or mistreated. I know that words alone aren't enough, he continued, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I'm committed to changing, to being a better officer, a better person. I know it's going to take time, and I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm here, and I'm ready to do the work. The room was silent, the tension thick as the community processed Ryan's words. For a moment, no one spoke, and Ryan feared that his apology had fallen on deaf ears. But then, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Prove it," the voice said, strong and unwavering. "Prove that you're really going to change." Ryan turned to see an older black woman standing, her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance, and Ryan recognized her as one of the people he had pulled over years ago for a minor infraction, treating her with disdain and disrespect. "You're right," Ryan replied, nodding solemnly. "I need to prove it, and I will. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to earn your trust. I want to be someone you can rely on, someone you can respect, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that happen." The woman studied Ryan for a long moment, her expression softening just a fraction. "We'll see," she said finally, her voice quieter but no less firm. "We'll see if you really mean it." As Ryan stepped away from the podium, David returned to the front of the room. "This is just the beginning," he said, addressing the crowd. "We're going to rebuild this department, brick by brick, with transparency, accountability, and justice at the forefront. But we can't do it alone. We need your help, your input, your guidance. This is our city, our community, and it's time we take it back together." The crowd began to murmur in agreement, and Ryan felt a small glimmer of hope take root in his chest. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path, a path that could lead to redemption, both for himself and for the community he had once failed.